It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Oh, welcome back. You're live with Expresso. Thank you so much for tuning in. What a mixed bag we've had this morning, and we are now going to hopefully empower with our next segment. Many people who have disabilities, both visible and invisible, face a variety of challenges in their everyday lives, not only in South Africa, but I think throughout the world. Disabled people are starved of services, often live in isolation, and are deprived of education and employment. And to a degree that I think would shock most of you. Now, individuals with disabilities are also faced with the stigma attached and discrimination from the society where they live. Here to talk us through the challenges disabled people face and what needs to be done, please welcome Noma-India, Christabella, Zenzile and Bongani, Yamba from the People South Africa organization. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Noma, can I ask this of you, first of all, because I've been lucky enough to work in a space alongside, I say, differently abled people.
Okay.
Because every person that I've interviewed has done something that physically, I've interviewed people who have taken a wheelchair from Johannesburg to Cape Town, something physically that I'm not capable of doing.
Okay.
Do you prefer to be called differently abled, or are you comfortable with the label disabled?
I'm actually much more comfortable when you call me a person with a disability, because I'm
Really?
a person before my disability.
I love that.
That's it. That's
I absolutely love that, and I think that's what people often get lost on is the stigma that's attached to it. Maybe I can put this to you, Bongani. What is considered a disability in South Africa?
A disability is the physical impairment, but be it mental, sight, a sensory impairment when it comes to doing things, and kind of inability, but to a certain extent of doing things. But that's why my colleague is putting it as saying, I'm the person with a disability, because that does not totally make that person really unable to do anything. But it's just that that person is limited to do things in a certain extent, or up to a certain extent.
What is
The honest truth about it at the end of the day, Graham, is it's the environment that disabled us. Because if it was not society, then we would not be having those.
No, completely. And we all have to deal with differences in everyday life, but this we've just very comfortably labeled as something. And I think, for me, I'd be interested to know the prevalence of people living with disabilities in South Africa. Do any particular provinces stand out? How many people are living with disabilities in South Africa at the moment?
At the moment, we're standing at the stats that were done in 2011, actually, because that's what the last stats that Stats SA did, which was at 7.5%. With the highest, actually, it will be Free State with about 11.1%, and then which is followed by Northern Cape. Because the lowest, actually, is Gauteng, with 5.3%.
The Western Cape.
And why it's vital for us to know this is because we need certain infrastructure built. We need business systems and structures to understand both the private and government to understand this so that they can make adjustments to that living space, as you've put it. Which disabilities are most prevalent?
The most prevalent currently is visual impairment, because it starts from partially impairment and going as much as it goes to totally blind.
We're going to, maybe I can ask you from a personal perspective, because we're going to delve into the myriad of challenges that you face, and clearly you've found a way to elevate yourself above those, and you've actually turned it into your life's calling to work on that field. But what, for someone, a person living with your disability, what has been the biggest challenge?
I guess with me, the biggest challenge has been the transport accessibility, the infrastructure in terms of buildings, because it literally becomes a challenge. The roads itself, because you'll find like pavements are a challenge because they are high or they are not properly done. And literally with some other people also, it becomes an employment issue, education issue, because you'll find like even schools in terms of infrastructure,
access to education
just doesn't give us that. So it doesn't give us at all, which is one of the reasons that we always say we're striving for an accessible South Africa to all.
How you are sitting there smiling as you tell me these things, I don't understand, because I can feel my frustration welling, and I can barely grasp what you must go through or what you have gone through. But thank you so much for coming coming in. We've got another 2 sections to this chat. We're going to continue to talk about the challenges that people living with disabilities, and I stress that people living with disabilities, not disabled people, are dealing with in South Africa and what needs to be done about it.
Right.
Thank you.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. You're live with Expresso. People living with disabilities and the myriad of challenges that they face. That is the focus of our discussion right now. And I'd like to welcome back Noma-India, Christabella, Zenzile and Bongani Yamba from the People South Africa organization. Guys, thank you so much for speaking so frankly with me, educating me through this process. I was saying before the break that I could feel my frustration levels rising. So I can certainly to some small degree empathize with why you are challenged to the degree that you are and why you feel it's so necessary. We were asking amongst ourselves what needs to be done. Well, this needs to be done. Discussion to break the stigma. Where it becomes heartbreaking is the challenge when faced on the education front. The idea of how does it make you feel when I say normal schools and schools with special needs? A child in a wheelchair, what school should they be going to?
The normal, just the word normal, already it just it just doesn't work as it is. So just in itself. And then at the end of the day, we're trying, and actually it's something that should be done. We should be going away with special schools and normality. Because, for example, you want to tell me, do we have enough schools? Yes, we have enough schools. But the thing is, there is just the fact that you just make sure that it's inclusive. Because I don't see any reason why an able-bodied child and a child with a disability cannot be in the same school, because we need to be doing mainstreaming.
Yeah, school is for the mind. That's
exactly.
It's for the mind. But the thing is this, we do understand with the issues of some kids who need some special focus, like the children with autism, for example.
When it comes to learning disabilities in that space.
Yes.
Yeah.
But however, children with physical disabilities, a child on the wheelchair, why that child cannot go to the very same school? It's because the teachers themselves are not equipped, the school is not ready to be accessible, but we'll just find that this child was doing the grade 10 in the very same school. He happened to have a car accident, but suddenly now that this person is on the wheelchair, cannot go to the very same school, which was maybe nearby home, and he has to be taken to a special school where the child...
Another challenge.
Where the subject has to be changed, because even the society in itself now is saying when you are on the wheelchair or when you have this physical disability, you need to be somebody else. You need to be an artist, you need to do this, because the society does not believe that when you are on the wheelchair or with crutches, you can be the doctor, you can be the lawyer, you can be that particular individual. Now you need something else, now everything must change. But if society and school, in fact, particularly the government, can encourage the schools, especially the teachers, to go, whether in the special workshops, to be equipped to understand these kids.
Headmasters, take it upon yourselves right now to make sure that your school is accessible and that your staff are ready. I've got to shift gears now, because something that really lit a light for me is the idea of people having to deal with the resources needed to cope with a disability. So many families in South Africa are living below the poverty line or with not nearly enough. I mean, this would test a family with resources.
Exactly.
How difficult is it for a family that is living below the poverty line or doesn't have the financial groundwork or framework to be able to deal with a disability?
It's extremely difficult, actually, Graham, because as a family that actually can afford on its own, because first of all, we have assistive devices that are way expensive, because literally everything that you need to use, it's a need, because that's one of the reasons that government seems to actually needs to find a way to correct this. Because the devices that we use, they are needs, they are not wants. Because without my wheelchair, I'm unable to access
I feel like you should be saying that directly into camera. It's a need and not a want. How much did your wheelchair cost?
My wheelchair costed me 40,000 rand. And it's not something that you can say, you buying it and saying you having a deposit, you lay buying it. It's something literally that you need to pay cash. How many people are able to just sit there and say you're able to afford a chair, paying it 40,000 rand cash? And then government has a thing of saying you need to be on a waiting list for 5 years, because you need to manage with a wheelchair for 5 years. There is no way a device can last you that long.
Especially if you're using it for transport.
And especially using it for transport. Because first of all, you need to be able to travel around. You need to be able to move around. Because at the end of the day, your assistive device is what gets you to move around. So imagine in that situation now that how would government expect a family that literally lives in poverty that basically cannot afford, how would they be able to afford it?
I hope the right person in government is listening right now. We are talking about the challenges that people living with disabilities are facing. We have dealt with education, we have dealt with accessibility in that space, and we're going to continue along that line with employment in just a moment, because ultimately that is what every human being in South Africa has a right to, gainful employment and healthcare added to that. We're going to continue a very interesting discussion in just a moment.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we round off what has been a very informative and an enriching discussion for me. It's actually really opened my eyes. We are chatting to Noma-India, Christabella, Zenzile and Bongani, Yamba from the DPSA. Guys, thank you so much for really opening my eyes in this space. Right now, we are talking about accessibility for people living with disabilities. Let's talk about the grant, because I think a lot of people would desperately need to rely on that. How do you apply for a grant, and how much does that grant actually help?
Sure. When you apply for a grant, one has to go to, especially when you are a person with a disability, you first go to the doctor to get a letter of recommendation, or kind of the letter that will tell the kind of disability, that classifies your disability. And then from then on, then you'll go to the SASSA offices. Then that's where they will evaluate the information they got from the doctor, then whether you qualify or not. To each, how does it begin and end? And that's a hand to mouth, and that's it. Because 1,700 rand, that's a grocery.
Yeah, it's one.
Further than that, you can't do anything.
Which means, as an adult person living with a disability, you need a job.
Exactly.
You need to be able to pay your own way.
Because sometimes you happen to have dependents.
And how then, because not everyone is born with a disability, many people find themselves in a situation, some people have to deal with a myriad of disabilities. I can't believe that you've gone through what you've gone through in your own personal capacity. How then does someone get a job when we talk about accessibility within the labour context? Do labour laws help or protect in any way people living with disabilities? And what are the biggest barriers? When we talk about having a special education, does that special education put you in any way on par with someone leaving a school with a grade 12? If you wanted to then even consider tertiary or to get a job after school, are you able to do that with a qualification from a so-called special needs school?
Look, when it comes to disability, everything is a challenge. You might have the degree.
Just learn that and deal with it, yeah.
You might have the degree. You might have your grade 12, which is that's the qualification that an employer and a future employer would look for. But the first thing is a reasonable accommodation. When that person enters the door, look at you, they start to think of the burden that they will have to take you around, to scroll you around with this wheelchair, to induct you and all that stuff, and to accommodate you and all the cost that it goes with and all that stuff. So it's a challenge. So you might lose even in that India visible because you have this disability, because the future employer is not willing to go that extra mile with you.
Which is probably actually illegal discrimination.
Exactly, because now the first thing it's going to be like, okay, here comes Noma-India, she's on a wheelchair. Now I need to make sure there's a ramp. I need to make sure the bathroom is spacious enough for her to get in and out.
Which you should be doing.
I need to be like, it's visual impairment. Now I need to make sure she needs to use Zoom tags. She needs to use a computer. She needs to use Braille. You're already looking at cost. But you're not looking at the fact that it's reasonable accommodation for me, because it is what makes me able to be able to participate in everyday life.
And do my job. And trust me, human capital is your most important resource, and you might be missing out on having the best resource for your company. I just can't escape the thought of, if someone can't get a grade 12 because they can't go to a so-called normal school, how are they going to get a job?
Exactly.
How are you going to be able to get a job? So lastly, because we have to unfortunately round off this chat, if you could get society to change, government to change, what needs to change to make life for you as people living with disabilities better?
Firstly, when it comes to government, surely if they can adapt to our call that we always make of the self-representation.
Yeah.
If the president in the office has got the so-called disability group, then that must go down right across in all the spheres of government.
Okay.
The premier, in his subcommittees and all that stuff, the MECs, in the mayor's committee, we need representation there. So that whatever is being decided, be it the new policies and everything, at least that can be, we can participate. We can have an access to knowledge and information to participate. So that when these things are drafted there, at least they have our own input. But it's a pity though. I can give you an example. I think about 2 months ago, we wrote a letter to our Premier, Mr. Alan Winde. Guess what happened to that letter? He received a letter, we invited him for a meeting so that we can discuss the issues that are affecting us, especially when it comes to government. He forwarded that letter to the social development. That tells you that what he assumed is that what have to do with disability is got to do with the social welfare.
Keep it in its compartment, yeah.
Which is a problem,
not ready
because
enough.
that's one of the things we've always raised and which we had a problem with in the first place when disability now was put as social development, as a social issue. No, because the minute they changed it from the presidency and they made it a social development issue, that's actually when we took 10 steps back. Because that was not trying to solve anything. Because at the end of the day, which is what I always say, is like the best thing that government can do is actually allow people with disabilities to actually be part of society instead of excluding them.
For sure.
Because the minute you start treating people differently, that is what actually disables us completely.
Yep, it's not the disability that's
Exactly.
disabling you. It's
So,
the
which
way
is
that
what
you are
as
being
disabled
treated.
people South Africa, we always emphasize because we do diversity and want inclusion. Not for you to treat me different. There's nothing different between me and you, Graham. The only difference is I'm sitting down and you walking. But at the end of the day, what I'm able to do, you might not be able to do.
Sister, right now we are all eye level, and I
Definitely.
really am
Yes.
drawing a huge amount out of what you've said. Thank you so much, Noma, Bongani. Thank you for everything
Thank you
that
very
you're
much,
doing
Darren,
in
for
this
having
space.
us here, man.
Absolute pleasure. I think society, we know what needs to be done. I have a feeling government has a vital role to play in this as well. But most importantly, all of us can treat people living with disabilities in a way that makes them feel like normal people, because that's exactly what they are.
Yes.